The room went silent. I sat at the mahogany defense table, my shoulders slumped, wearing a suit that was 2 sizes too big, a deliberate choice. To everyone in the courtroom, I looked like a man who had already lost. Across the aisle, my wife, Elena, sat like a queen on a throne. She was draped in Cartier and wore a smirk that told the world she had already won. Her high-priced lawyer, a shark named Sterling, adjusted his silk tie and gave me a look of pure pity. The judge, a stern woman with glasses perched on the bridge of her nose, stared at the document in front of her. This was the final hearing for our asset dissolution. In plain English, Elena was taking the tech company I had built from a garage startup, the $5 million estate in the Hamptons, and every cent in our joint accounts. She had spent the last year painting me as an incompetent, lazy husband who lived off her inheritance. The truth, her inheritance was a lie, and the company was my sweat and blood. But on paper, she had me cornered. She had forced me to sign a post-nuptial agreement 3 years ago when my mother was sick, and I was distracted by grief. I hadn't even read the fine print, or so she thought. "Mr. Sterling," the judge said, her voice echoing in the marble hall, "you are requesting that the court enforce the total transfer clause of the March 14th agreement?" "That is correct, Your Honor," beamed Sterling. "As per the contract, since my client provided the initial capital, all intellectual property and physical assets revert to her in the event of a filing. My client's husband is entitled to a $50,000 severance and not a penny more." Elena leaned over to her sister in the front row and whispered loud enough for me to hear, "He'll be back to fixing printers in a week." The gallery chuckled. Even the bailiffs seemed to look away in embarrassment for me. I looked down at my hands, laced together on the table. My lawyer, an old man named Arthur who looked like he belonged in a library, hadn't said a word all morning. "Mr. Vance," the judge looked at me, "do you have anything to say before I sign this decree?" I felt Elena's eyes burning into the side of my head. She was waiting for me to beg. She wanted one last moment of humiliation before she discarded me like trash. I took a deep breath and looked at Arthur. He nodded slowly and pulled a single, sealed yellow envelope from his briefcase. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steady for the first time, "we don't contest the agreement. We only ask that the court acknowledges the secondary addendum hidden within the digital filing." Elena's smirk flickered. "What is he talking about?" she hissed to Sterling. The judge looked up, her eyes wide as she stared directly at Elena. To understand how I ended up being treated like a stranger in my own home, you have to understand the last 5 years. When I met Elena, she was a struggling gallery owner, and I was a coder with a dream. We built Vance Tech together, or so I told her to make her feel included. But as the company grew into a multi-million-dollar empire, the power dynamic shifted. Elena's family, the Whitneys, had old money attitudes with no money bank accounts. Once I started bringing in the checks, they moved in like parasites. Her brother, Marcus, was made VP of operations, though he couldn't even operate a toaster. Her mother treated me like the hired help. "Mark, be a dear and move the Bentley," her mother would say at dinner parties, "and don't use the guest towels. Those are for the real family." I was the nobody, the lucky guy who married into a name. I kept my mouth shut. I worked 18-hour days in the basement while they threw galas upstairs. I became the ghost in the house. I overheard them talking in the kitchen one night. "How much longer do we have to keep him around?" Marcus asked, the ice clinking in his scotch. "Just until the 3-year mark on the post-nuptial," Elena replied, her voice cold and devoid of the warmth I thought we shared. "Once that hits, the inactivity clause kicks in. If he hasn't challenged my chairmanship by then, he legally concedes the CEO chair to me. He's so buried in code he doesn't even know what year it is." "He's pathetic," Marcus laughed. "He actually thinks you love him." I stood in the shadows of the hallway, clutching a motherboard I'd been working on. My heart didn't break, it turned into a diamond, hard, cold, and focused. They thought I was a quiet idiot. They forgot that a coder's entire life is built on finding bugs in the system. I went back to my office and opened the master file for the post-nuptial agreement. I didn't try to delete it. I didn't try to change it. Instead, I added one single invisible line of code to the digital document that would be filed with the state. For the next 2 years, I played the part of the bumbling, underestimated husband. I let them insult me. I let them take credit for my patents. I even let Elena start her very public affair with Julian, the consultant she hired to replace me. I was waiting for the perfect moment to trigger the trap. The trigger happened at the Vance Tech 5th Anniversary Gala. It was a black tie event filled with investors, tech giants, and the city's elite. I arrived late, wearing an old suit, looking exhausted. Elena was on stage, glowing under the spotlights. Julian was standing right beside her, his hand resting a little too low on her waist. The crowd didn't even look at me as I tried to make my way to the front. "Tonight is about the future," Elena announced into the microphone, "and the future of Vance Tech requires leadership that is bold, visible, and prestigious. It is with a heavy heart that I announce the retirement of my husband, Mark Vance, from all board activities." The room gasped, then went silent. Behind her, a giant screen showed a signed document, the post-nuptial agreement. "Mark has struggled with personal issues," she lied smoothly, her eyes finding mine in the crowd with a look of predatory triumph. "For his own well-being, he has signed over his shares and his role. From tonight, Julian Thorne will be stepping in as acting CEO." Julian stepped forward, grinning. "It's time to take this company to a level a simple coder could never imagine." I stood there, surrounded by people who used to call me friend, watching them clap for the man who was stealing my life. Marcus, her brother, stepped up to me and leaned into my ear. "Security has already packed your things, Mark. Your keycard is deactivated. Your personal accounts are frozen for an audit. You're done. Don't make a scene or we'll have you removed in cuffs." "The company belongs to the name Whitney now," Elena added from the stage, looking down at me. "Go back to the garage, Mark. It's where you belong." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply pulled out my phone and sent a single encrypted email to a hidden server. "Is that it?" I asked, looking up at her. "You're taking everything?" "Everything," she mouthed, blowing a mock kiss. I started walking in the rain, but I wasn't cold. I was counting down the seconds until the audit they started actually finished. The next 48 hours were a calculated nightmare. Elena had been thorough. I was locked out of my house. My credit cards were declined at a cheap motel. I ended up sitting on a park bench with nothing but a backpack containing my laptop and a few old hard drives. Elena sent me a text. "The divorce papers are at the courthouse. Sign them, take the $50K, and disappear. If you fight, I'll release the evidence of your embezzlement." She had framed me. She'd moved funds from the company into a private account in my name months ago, money I hadn't even known existed. It was a classic poison pill. If I tried to claim the company back, she'd send me to prison. The world thought I was a broken man. My former employees blocked my number. My friends wouldn't return my calls. Even my own sister called me crying, saying Elena's lawyers were threatening to sue her if she helped me. I went to a public library to use the Wi-Fi. I needed to see if the seed I planted had sprouted. I logged in to the state's judicial filing system. There it was, the post-nuptial agreement Elena had filed. She thought she had used a standard PDF. She didn't realize I had replaced the firm's template with a proprietary smart contract file I designed. It looked like a normal document, but it had a hidden, self-executing layer. As I sat there, a man in a gray suit sat down across from me. He looked like a government official, dry, humorless, and sharp. "Mark Vance?" he asked. "Who wants to know?" "I'm with the Forensic Accounting Division of the SEC. We received an automated trigger from your company's filing system regarding Clause 9B. Do you have the physical encryption key?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, battered flash drive shaped like a Lego brick. "I've been waiting for you." "The Whitneys think they own the board," the man said, leaning in. "But if what this trigger says is true, they don't even own the chairs they're sitting on." "Mr. Vance," the man said, standing up, "we need to go to the courthouse. Now." We didn't go to the courthouse to fight the divorce. We went to trigger the audit of origin. While Elena was busy shopping for a new penthouse and Julian was firing my old dev team, I was in a secure room with Arthur, my senile lawyer, who was actually a retired federal prosecutor and a family friend. "She really thought she could hide the embezzlement behind your name," Arthur chuckled, looking through the ledger I had meticulously kept in a hidden partition of the company's server. "She didn't realize that every time she moved money, the system took a snapshot of her IP address and her biometric login." "She was sloppy because she thought I was a nobody," I said. "She thought a nobody doesn't keep receipts." I hadn't just kept receipts, I had recorded every meeting in our house for 2 years. I had copies of the original deeds to the land the company sat on, land that had been gifted to me by my grandfather, not the Whitney estate. The most important part is the addendum, I pointed to the screen. In the post-nuptial agreement, Elena had inserted a clause saying, "All assets acquired during the marriage are the sole property of the managing director." She had then used her board power to name herself managing director. It was a clever play, but I had added a subclause in the digital metadata that defined managing director based on the original patent holder of the core technology. Since I held the patents in a private trust she couldn't see, the law legally recognized me as the managing director, regardless of what the board said. By signing that agreement, she hadn't taken the company from me, she had legally signed all of her assets over to me. The house, her jewelry, her family's remaining trust fund, she had accidentally tied them all to the managing director title. "She's gonna walk into that courtroom thinking she's finishing you. She has no idea she's already bankrupt." The door opened, and a clerk told us the judge was ready for the final hearing. Back in the courtroom, the judge's face was a mask of disbelief. "Mrs. Vance," the judge said, her voice dropping an octave, "there is a secondary issue here that precedes the asset division. It pertains to the heirship clause you insisted on including to protect the Whitney legacy." Elena nodded, looking smug. "Yes, Your Honor, the company must stay with the bloodline. Since Mark is, well, irrelevant, the shares should go to my son's trust, which I control." I felt a sting in my chest. Our son, Leo. I loved him more than anything. She was using him as a shield. "That's the problem," the judge said, pulling a second paper from the envelope Arthur had provided. "Mr. Vance submitted a DNA certification alongside the contract metadata. It was triggered automatically by the infidelity clause in your own agreement." The room went cold. Julian, sitting behind Elena, shifted uncomfortably. "The DNA results, cross-referenced with the clinic records from your business trip 3 years ago, show that Mr. Vance is not the biological father of the child in question." The gallery erupted in whispers. Elena's face turned a ghostly shade of white. That's private. That has nothing to do with the company." "Actually," I stood up, my voice calm, "it has everything to do with it. You wrote the contract so that only a biological Whitney heir could inherit the secondary shares. Since Leo isn't mine and Julian isn't a Whitney, those shares don't go to the trust. They revert to the founding grantor, which is me." Elena turned to Julian, her eyes wide with panic. Julian looked like he wanted to bolt for the door, but the judge wasn't finished. "There's more," the judge said, looking at the Whitneys. "Because you filed this under legacy protection, the law requires an immediate audit of the Whitney estate funds used to back the company. And according to these records, the Whitney estate has been empty for 10 years. You've been laundering Mark Vance's private earnings to pretend you were wealthy." Elena didn't go down without a fight. As the courtroom descended into chaos, she screamed at her lawyer. "He forged it! He's a coder! He manipulated the files! I want him arrested!" Within an hour, she had called her contacts in the local police department, friends of her father. By the time we walked out of the courtroom for a recess, 2 officers were waiting for me. "Mark Vance, you're under investigation for digital forgery and grand larceny," one officer said, reaching for his cuffs. "Wait," Arthur stepped in front of me. "You can't do this without a warrant. We have a sworn statement from the Whitney family's IT head that he saw Mark accessing the servers illegally last night." I looked over and saw Marcus, Elena's brother, standing by the elevators with a wicked grin. He had found evidence. They were trying to throw me in a cell before the judge could finalize the asset reversal. If I was in jail, they could tie the case up in appeals for years. "I didn't access the servers last night," I said quietly. "Tell it to the magistrate," the officer growled. As they led me away in handcuffs, Elena walked past me, leaning in close so only I could hear. "You think you're smart? I own this town, Mark. You're gonna rot in a cell while I sell your company to the highest bidder tomorrow morning. By the time you get out, there will be nothing left to claim." She walked away, her heels clicking victoriously on the marble floor. I was taken to a holding cell. I sat on the cold bench, looking at the security camera in the corner. I knew she was watching through her connections. I knew she thought she had won. What she didn't know is that I wanted them to arrest me. The next morning, Elena called an emergency board meeting to liquidate the company. She had Julian by her side and a group of vulture capitalists ready to strip Vance Tech for parts. "Since Mark Vance is currently in custody for fraud," Elena announced to the board, "as managing director, I am exercising my right to sell the core patents to Thorn Industries for $1. Julian grinned, pen in hand. It was the ultimate heist. They were going to steal the technology and leave the company a hollow shell. "Any objections?" Elena asked, her hand hovering over the gavel. "I have one," a voice boomed from the back of the room. The door swung open. I walked in, followed by 2 federal agents in windbreakers and the judge from the day before. Elena dropped her pen. "How? You're in jail!" "The IT head you hired to frame me?" I said, walking to the head of the table. "He's a freelancer I've known for 10 years. He gave the police the evidence I told him to give them, evidence that included a hidden audio file of you and Marcus planning the frame-up in the courthouse hallway." I tapped a key on my laptop, and the speakers in the boardroom filled with Elena's voice. "Just get him in cuffs for 24 hours. Once I sell the patents to Julian, it won't matter what the judge says." The board members looked at each other in horror. The federal agents stepped forward. "Elena Whitney, Julian Thorne, and Marcus Whitney, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, racketeering, and witness tampering." "You can't do this," Elena screamed, looking at the judge. "The contract. I'm the managing director." "That's the thing, Elena," I leaned over the table. "You missed the most important clause in the entire document." The room was deathly still. Elena was being held by an officer, her face contorted in rage and confusion. "What clause?" she spat. "I read that contract 1,000 times." "You read the text, but you didn't read the metadata trigger. You see, when you tried to sell the patents for $1, an undervalue transfer, it triggered a bad faith clause I buried in the digital architecture." I pointed to a line of code flashing red on the screen. "In the event that the managing director attempts to devalue the company's intellectual property for personal gain," I read aloud, "the title of managing director and all associated personal assets, including the Whitney Family Trust and all real estate held by the directors, immediately transferred to the silent partner." "Who is the silent partner?" Julian stammered. "There is no silent partner." "Actually, there is," I said. I pulled out an old yellowed letter from my grandfather. He wasn't just a farmer, he was one of the original investors in the bank that held the Whitney family's debt. My grandfather didn't just give me the land, he bought your family's debt 40 years ago. He kept it a secret because he wanted me to marry for love, not power. But he left a provision: if the Whitney family ever tried to usurp the Vance name, the debt would be called in full, effective immediately. The judge looked at the letter, then at the agents. This is a legal lien. Mr. Vance, you don't just own the company, you own the Whitney house, the Whitney cars, and the Whitney name. Elena collapsed into her chair. The old money she had used to look down on me was actually my money all along. She had been living in a house I owned, spending money I controlled, while calling me a nobody. "You're nothing," Elena whispered, tears streaming down her face. "No," I said, "I'm the man who kept the receipts." The aftermath was swift. Elena, Julian, and Marcus were led out of the building in handcuffs. The gala they had planned for their victory became a press conference for their indictment. Because of the bad faith clause, Elena was left with absolutely nothing, not even the $50,000 she had mockingly offered me. She was evicted from the mansion. Her designer clothes and jewelry were seized to pay back the Whitney debt. The last I heard, she was living in a studio apartment, waiting for a trial that would likely end in a 10-year sentence. As for Leo, I didn't care what the DNA said. I stayed his father. I used a portion of the recovered Whitney assets to set up a trust for him that Elena could never touch. He would grow up knowing that a man's worth isn't in his name, but in his integrity. A month later, I stood in my old office, the one in the basement. I was moving my things back to the top floor, but I paused at the desk where I had spent years being ignored. Arthur walked in, holding a final set of papers. "It's done, Mark. The company is 100% yours. The Whitneys are history. What are you going to do now?" I looked out the window at the city skyline. I felt no rush of adrenaline, no need to boast. I just felt quiet. "I'm going to build something new," I said. "And this time, I'm putting my name on the front door." I walked out of the office and handed my old key card to the security guard. He looked at me with newfound respect. "Have a good evening, Mr. Vance," he said. I nodded and walked toward my car. People often mistake silence for weakness. They think that because you don't bark, you don't have teeth. But the quietest person in the room is usually the one with the most information. They called me a nobody until the judge read my name. Moral: never underestimate the quiet man. He is busy documenting the noise you make.